Whenever you want. All right, very good. All right, folks, it's great to see you folks tonight. I know it's just lousy weather. It's not too bad, but it's not too good. Just kind of drizzly and nasty. Hope everybody's safe going home tonight. It was good to see you. I think I got the test back to everybody. Apparently some folks said they didn't get it, and I don't know if it was going to spam or whatever, but I just sent them out again. I sent out 2 this afternoon. If you got any questions, let me know. But tonight is our second to last night. Next week will be our final night in class. So 14 weeks has gone, pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. It's hard to believe, but 14 weeks goes pretty quickly. But I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope you have too. I hope you've learned something. And I'll say all this again next week, so don't worry about it. But it's time to begin this evening's class. So before we do, as we always do, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we can go ahead and get started. Father in heaven, we're thankful for the day. We're thankful, Lord, for the rain. We ask, Lord, that you bless us as we leave tonight. Help us to be safe and get home safely in spite of the weather conditions. Lord, we're thankful for our time together. We're grateful for your word. We're thankful that you've created us in such a way that we can think, that we can be curious and wonder and ask questions and gain more knowledge and insight into your word through reading it and studying it. We pray your blessings, Lord, on our class tonight, and we ask that you help us have an open mind and an open heart to receive your word. We're thankful for your son, Jesus. We're thankful for his sacrifice on the cross. We're thankful for the hope of a home in heaven with you that we have through him. And we pray all of these things in the name of your Son. Amen. All right. Let's see. Get rid of some of this stuff, extraneous stuff. Last week we finished up with chapter 45. Joseph has, of course, revealed himself to his brethren. They've had this tearful reunion. And he said, listen, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home, get it pack up the whole family, and I want you to come, and I want you to live in Egypt. Canaan there's still 5 years left of a 7-year famine. So I want you to go home, get everybody, come back here, and you will live off the fat of the land. Joseph, being second in command, has the ability to take care of his family, which I think, of course, goes to the idea of the family unit, especially back then. But I don't think that's changed too much. I think family still takes care of family for the most part. So he says, I want you to go get mom, or go get dad, go get the rest of your family, go get your wives, your kids, get everybody and bring them back. He tells Pharaoh what he's going to do, and Pharaoh says, hey, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to give you wagons to go, so it doesn't take you forever to get your stuff back here. You just load up the wagons and come back, and you will live in the very best places. Your flocks and your herds will have plenty of pasture, and everything is going to be fantastic. And he does literally save them from starvation. So Joseph's doing a very good thing here. But before they leave, he says, by the way, go home, don't detour, don't dilly-dally, but don't quarrel along the way. He knows what his brothers are like, and he knows that would be a very real possibility, that they start fighting over one thing or another. And he said, don't quarrel, just go home and get your stuff and come back. One good thing about when they get back, and we'll see that here in just a couple of moments, is there's plenty of room to spread out. They're not right up on top of each other. So every one of them has pasture land for their own stuff. They can spread out, and they're not all on top of each other. All right. So they get home, they tell Jacob about it. Jacob is, of course, overwhelmed by finding out that his son is not only alive and was not killed by a wild animal, and we talked about the idea of finding out that that's how your child, lost their life, is being mauled by a wild animal. He doesn't believe it at first, but and this is the idea, right? You're walking by sight. I'll believe it when I see him. But we'll see here in just a couple of moments. But he basically says, now that I know that Joseph is alive, even if I never see him, if I know that he wasn't killed in that way, I know that he's still alive, I can die. I can die not in misery and anger and bitterness. We'll see where this comes out in just a couple of moments when he talks to Pharaoh. Jacob is not particularly enamored of the life that he's led. But we'll see that here in a couple of moments. All right, anybody got anything we want to talk about before we start in on chapter 46 tonight? Anything, any ideas or thoughts from last week that we didn't get to? We kind of ended up right at the bell, so we didn't get a lot of chance to talk. But I want to give everybody an opportunity if they want. All right, well, let's do it then. Let's go to chapter 46. Starting in chapter 46 and verse 1, it says, so Israel, now you notice that it's interesting, they're talking about the man Israel, but really what is this? This is the nation of Israel, isn't it? The nation of Israel is packing up in Canaan, and they are moving as a group to Egypt for a period of time. So this tells us that even though they are a nation, a budding nation, a nation in utero, so to speak, what are they? They're still sojourners. They still don't have a land, a place, a property to call their own. Even when they move into Egypt, the land still belongs to Pharaoh. It doesn't belong to them. They are living there at his convenience. They live there as long as they want to. They have access to it. They have everything they could possibly want, but it still doesn't belong to them. They don't have a nation of their own. They don't have that land of their own yet. So when it talks about it, I like this, it says, so Israel took his. So we're talking about the man, but really we're talking about a future nation that's going to come into being. So Israel takes his journey with all that he had, and he comes to where? Beersheba. What's in Beersheba? What is in Beersheba? Because what does he do there? He offers sacrifices. So what must be in Beersheba? An altar, yes. An altar. So an altar was built in Beersheba many years ago, and it is still in use. I don't know if this is kind of like as we would do, if we go out of town and we're going to be going on a Sunday, we look for the closest congregation to go to. Here's Jacob on his way down into Israel. He's going, and we'll see the route that he takes. He leaves his place and he goes down, and there's Beersheba there, and there happens to be an altar there. Or maybe that's why he goes to Beersheba first to offer sacrifices. Why he felt the need to offer sacrifices at this time, I don't know. It could be that it was that time of year that sacrifices would have been required of Jacob by God. One of the things we don't have is the particulars of his worship. We don't know exactly what he did in his worship, but we do know that he offers up sacrifices there at Beersheba. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and look at this. All right, so here is where Jacob and his family are living at that particular point in time. This is where Joseph went up to Shechem. Remember, he went looking for his brothers. They weren't there, so he went up to Dothan. That's where they were. That's where he was thrown in the pit, and then he was carried by those traders all the way down into Egypt, sold in Egypt. And then as they come back up out, this is the way they come back out. When they leave Egypt after several hundreds of years, that's the route that they take. So what happens here is that Jacob, as he is told, hey, come live with me in Egypt, he goes from Hebron and he takes his family as far as Beersheba before he stops and he offers up sacrifices. And it could be that he's simply requesting of God's safety. Could be that, Lord, keep us, protect us while we're in Egypt. We're going into a foreign land. They have foreign gods. We don't know how long we will be welcome there. Keep us, protect us, and so forth and so on. He may also be asking blessings on behalf of Pharaoh. There's several different things, but we're not given to know exactly what it is. It just simply says that he goes and he offers sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So while he's there, whether it's before or after, but during the period that he's in Beersheba, it says God spoke to Israel / Jacob in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And Jacob says, here I am. He says, I am God. Look at what he's going to reaffirm here. I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down into Egypt, for there I will make you into a what? A what? A great nation. All right, so I'll tell you what, let me get to this. So God expounds here on his nation promise. And his nation promise is essentially this: don't be afraid, for there, where? In Egypt, I will make you into a great nation. So it tells us that the nation promise is not going to occur while he's living in Canaan. It's going to happen down there, and then he's going to bring this great nation up out of captivity. He talks about this several chapters back. He tells them what's going to happen. You're going to dwell in a land that's not yours, and then you're going to come out of that land a great nation. You're going to come out of captivity a great nation. And then I'm going to take you to this place that I'm preparing for you. That sounds a lot like a Christian, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like a Christian. We're sojourners. We're in a land that's not ours. He's going to bring us up out of captivity, which is what? Sin. And he's going to deliver us into what? The kingdom of heaven. I mean, the parallels are unmistakable. All right? So here's the thing. Look what he says. He says, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. Why might he be afraid to go down into Egypt? What might scare or frighten Jacob about going down into the land of Egypt? What are some reasons? So he tells him, so God knows something that maybe we're not given to know, but God knows something, and he tells him, don't be afraid. So it could be that while he's offering these sacrifices, he's praying for safety, he's praying for protection. What might Jacob be afraid of living in Egypt? Yeah.
Well, maybe two things. Maybe because Egypt is aren't they bigger and stronger?
Yeah, absolutely.
And also because of their gods. I mean, would he kind of fear of the influence that they might have on his own nation?
Okay. We'll put polytheistic. All right. They worship many gods. And I will say that from what I'm reading, you have the religious people in any nation that are going to be very much adherents of their gods. Then you might have people that are sort of like, well, yeah, there are gods. They, I do what's basically expected of me, but I'm not really a worshiper, so to speak. Kind of like we have here, right? It's like I'm a Christian. Well, what kind of Christian are you? I'm an Easter, Christmas kind of Christian. I don't really go to services. I don't really do anything. I don't really believe anything, but I'm a Christian. Well, kind of probably the same thing there. You had Egyptians that were very, very devoted to their gods. You had the priests of the different sects of the gods. And that certainly would be the case. But their belief would lead them to worship in particular ways. And you're right. It could be that he was concerned that his family would go down there and maybe be pulled away by the gods of Egypt. I mean, it's happened in the past. It's not out of the realm of possibility that could certainly be a very big concern of Jacob. I've got sons, and I've got their wives. I've got grandchildren, and I'm worried, much like Abraham, right? Don't get a wife for my son from here. Worried they're going to get down there, maybe start intermingling and intermarrying, and then all of a sudden you've got the fabric of Egypt has now been woven into the fabric of Israel, and it's very tough. It's like pulling off a Band-Aid that's gotten in your arm here. Can you get it out? Yeah. Is it going to hurt a lot? Yeah. Okay, so that could very well be a possibility. The idea that they're bigger and stronger, they're bigger and they're stronger. They're worried to get down there and all of a sudden they're not welcome anymore. Maybe the one that's asking them to come down and inviting them down there, their demeanor towards Jacob and his family may change, and they decide that, well, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to simply take what we want. We'll kill who we want to kill. We'll take your stuff, and then all of a sudden Jacob's substance has been consumed by Egypt. It's been swallowed up, and it's no longer. So two very real possibilities. Anybody got anything else? Any other reason that Jacob might fear going down into Egypt? Kind of like when Abraham went down into Egypt, right? What did he say? He said, "I'm worried that they're going to kill me because of you. Talking to Sarah, tell them that you're my sister, not my wife, because I'm worried that they may kill me." So there's lots of different reasons, and this is. I think we think sometimes that if we're scared or if we're worried that somehow we don't have any faith, and that's not the case. We can have absolute faith, but we can still be concerned. We can still be worried. We can still even be fearful. But as long as it doesn't pull us away from God, fear is not necessarily a problem. We just got to have to work on it, right? And work through it in a good way that allows our faith in God to shine through, but still confront the issues that we're having with whatever the situation might be. All right? So that's a couple of reasons, and there's probably multiple other ones. But what happens here? So God is talking to him, and he says, "Do not be afraid. I will make you into a great nation." And look how he comforts him in this. He's in verse 4. He says, "I myself will go down with you to Egypt." So not only is he saying, "Don't be fearful because I'm going to be with you." And it's interesting that he uses that terminology. "I myself will go down into Egypt with you." How is that going to happen? There's a couple different ways that could happen, right? It could be simply that Jacob's faith is personified. It could also mean that God literally will be with him. We think, how in the world would that be possible? Well, what happened when the Israelites came up out of Egypt? What went before them during the day? It was a what? A cloud, right? And then at night it was a pillar of fire. So what was this? It was God personified. That's what it was. It was the power of God personified. We don't see necessarily how this worked in regards to Jacob, but when we look at this and say that God, I myself will go down there with you, we see that it is not without when the Israelites come up out of Egypt, there's precedent for what happens with the cloud and the pillar. That God said He would be with him, literally. Protecting him, watching over him, guarding him, making sure that nothing happens to him or his family, because He says, I'm going to make of you a great nation. If He allows something to happen to Jacob, and if He allows his family to be consumed, if He allows everything that he's got to be lost in Egyptian culture, then it's going to be very difficult to make a nation. God says, I'm not going to let that happen. I will make sure that you're taken care of. Make sure that you still remain separate. And He goes even so a little bit further in our reading. We're going to see where He actually goes even an extra step in regards to that. All right? So He says, I will go down with you in Egypt. I will also bring you up again. Forgot my slide. I will go down with you into Egypt. I will also bring you back up again. What does this mean? This is obvious. There's two ways that Jacob's going to be brought back up again, right? Number one, he's going to be brought back bodily. And how does this happen?
They take him back to bury him.
They take him back to Machpelah to bury him, right? After he passes, there's this big mourning for Jacob in Egypt. And Joseph himself, along with representatives of the Egyptian government, basically almost everybody but Pharaoh himself, goes up and they carry Jacob's body out. They go as far as Machpelah, they bury him, and then of course they all go back out into Egypt. That's physically. How else is God going to bring Jacob up out of Egypt? Sorry, kind of gave it away.
Moses leads the way.
All right, so He's going to bring back up Jacob, or Israel, as in the nation of Israel. He's going to bring back up Jacob out of Egypt. Spiritually, in the physical aspect of the nation of Israel. Okay, He says, I will bring you back up again. And here it says, and Joseph's hand will close your eyes. And what is that referring to? Obviously, what happens when somebody dies? What has to happen? They come over and they close your eyes. That doesn't happen quite as often as people think that every movie, you have to just go up there and you just sort of like basically put your hand over his and his eyes closed. It's not quite that easy. Most people don't die with their eyes open. Most people die with their eyes closed. But what he's saying here is essentially that Joseph is going to be there when you pass, as you pass. He's going to make sure that you're taken care of, and he is going to close your eyes. He's going to be with you as you pass away from this life. All right? So God gives him a couple of promises here, and all of them are trustworthy promises because all of them, of course, we find out come to pass. So after this, Jacob comes out of Beersheba. Oops. Well, I'll let you write that down. Comes up out of Beersheba, finishes his sacrifice, finishes his worship, as the patriarch he does his duty, and then he goes down and they go down into Egypt. In verse 5 it says, chapter 46, verse 5, the sons of Israel, all right, the sons, all of the patriarchs of the tribes, carried Jacob, their father, their little ones, so their children, and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. This is a lot of stuff. I mean, these guys had really been blessed by God in the land that they were sojourning in. And all of the goods of the land were coming to them, all of the physical things. Whether it's monetarily or whether it's livestock or whatever it might be, God has blessed them just enormously. So they're carrying just these big giant loaded treasure boxes down into Egypt. And they come into Egypt, Jacob and all of his offspring with him. All right, so he brings his entire family, his goods, his flocks, and his herds. Pharaoh allows him land, but remember this, since he's not giving them the land, Pharaoh does not add anything to Jacob's wealth. He merely allows him an opportunity to survive we still have 5 more years of a devastating famine. So Pharaoh blesses Jacob by giving him the fat of the land, allowing him the very best pasture lands right at the mouth of the Nile River, the headwaters of the Nile. He gives him that land for pasture and sustains Jacob, but does not add to his wealth, so to speak. All right. At this point, Jacob's a fairly old man. He's 139 years old at this point. So he's been around for quite some time. And, if you think about it, it's a good way to go out, right? He doesn't go out mourning either one of his sons. He is in his old age. He has his family gathered to him. And it's kind of the way that most people, if you ask them, that's the way most people want to go. Surrounded by family, cared for, watched over. And, that his son, his favorite son, let's be honest, Joseph is going to be the one that closes his eyes at his death. So it's a good life, so to speak. All right, let's look at this for just a couple moments because, I think too many times people just go through this in verse 8. He says, all of his offspring he brought with him into Egypt, and then it begins to detail some of this. Let's look at a little bit of this right now. So I want you to notice some of these people. Let's look at it. Jacob and his sons, these are the names of the descendants. Remember, Rachel was already gone. Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. What's the significance of Reuben being the firstborn, though? What's going to happen in regards to his being the firstborn? What would normally come to him? He would have the rights of the firstborn in regards to the double portion of the estate, but Jacob's going to take that away from him, isn't it? When he goes for the blessing, I think in chapter 49 or 50, Jacob removed that blessing from him because of his conduct. All right, so he takes that away from him. So he says, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and I like how it mentions that, because we're going to find out later that him being firstborn didn't have any, gave him nothing. All right, it amounted to nothing in his case. But it also says the sons of Reuben, and it lists all of the sons of Reuben. And then it says the sons of Simeon, and it goes through the names, and a lot of these are very interesting names. We obviously don't use much of these anymore, and probably for good reason. Some of them would be difficult, and they're hard enough as it is. But at the end it says, Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. We're not given to know exactly what that is. But obviously, Simeon, it could be that his first wife had died, and now he is married again to a Canaanite woman. But he's had this son, Shaul. In verse 11, the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now I want you to go to Numbers chapter 4. Numbers chapter 4 gives us why did he list these men. And if we go to Numbers chapter 4, it talks about these guys. All three of these brothers have specific duties as Levites and priests of God. You go to chapter 4, and I'm going to read all of it. But the Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron, saying, and take a census of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, by their clans and their fathers' houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old. This is the working timeline of a Levite. All who can come on duty to do the work in the tent of meeting. This is the service of the sons of Kohath in the tent of meeting, the most holy things. When the camp is to set out, Aaron and his sons shall go in and take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of testimony, the ark of the covenant, with it. Then they shall put on a covering of goat skin, spread on top of that a cloth, put it in its poles. Over the table of bread of presence, you put a cloth of blue. He's given these very detailed instructions as to how the tabernacle is to be treated and how it's to be moved. They have very specific instructions. And he goes through all of these things and spreading these cloth of blue, cover everything up, make sure that everything's taken care of, cover up the Ark of the Covenant, cover up everything. In verse 12, and they shall take all the vessels of the service, Okay, in verse 15, that's where I meant to go. When Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all of the furnishings, as the camp sets out, after that, the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these. But they must not touch the holy things lest they die. These are the things in the tent of meeting that the sons of Kohath are to carry. So again, detailed instructions for people from that particular group of people amongst the Levites. And then, in verse 21, the Lord speaks to Moses again and says, take a census of the sons of Gershon by their fathers' houses and by their clans. And he details and lists all of these things. And verse 27, all the service of the sons of the Gershonites shall be at the command of Aaron and his sons, and all that they are to carry and all that they have to do, and you shall assign to their charge all that they are to carry. And it says, these are the service of the clans of the sons of the Gershonites in the tent of meeting, and their guard duty is to be under the direction of the son of Aaron the priest. So you have the Kohathites, then you have the Gershonites, and their responsibility is to carry certain things, and they act as guards. Okay, they're security personnel, so to speak. Okay, and then you go to verse 42. Those listed of the clans of the sons of Merari by their clans of their fathers' houses, so forth and so on. Let's see. Those who could come on duty for service in the tent of meeting. So the sons of Merari were the ones that would actually do the function of the priests inside the tabernacle. So you had guys who were responsible for the setup and the pickup of the tabernacle. You had guys who were responsible for carrying some of the stuff and acting as security. And then you had the guys who were actually responsible for, filling up the water, cutting the wood, sacrificing the animals, so forth and so on. So it's interesting that even as far back as chapter 46, he lists these guys out. So later on, we're going to know who these people are. It's kind of important. Then you have the sons of Judah in chapter 46 and verse 12. All right? The sons of Judah, Er, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But remember, Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan at God's hand. Remember, they did. I think it was Er was the one that said that he did what was wrong in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord destroyed him, or the Lord killed him, or had him killed. And then you have Onan, who refused to do the duty of a brother to his brother's widow, and God took him as well. God killed him as well. So those are the two that died in the land of Canaan. The rest of them came out. Also, if you'll notice that Perez is one that's mentioned. Why is Perez mentioned? I mentioned it right here. Why was Perez mentioned?
He's in the lineage of Christ.
Lineage of Christ, right? Exactly. I think it's the only. Let's see. I think that's the only. I think it's the only grandson that's mentioned. Maybe not, but oh no. The sons of Asher. There's one that has two grandsons. But that's all. That's the only ones that affect anything in the future, so to speak. All right, then last but certainly not least, you go down to verse 19, the sons of Rachel, right, the favored wife, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore him. So when Joseph became second in command, remember we talked about Pharaoh wanted to make Joseph as appealing and as non-confrontational to the Egyptians as he possibly could. So he sets him up in a palace. He dresses him the way an Egyptian would be dressed. He learns the language of the Egyptians. He does all of these things. And one of the things that Potiphar does is he gives him a wife. And he goes about as deep as you can possibly go. He says, I want you to marry one of my priests. Now this is a priest of a pagan god. All right. Jacob, had he known this was going to happen, would of course been just beside himself. But Joseph wasn't there and didn't know, there's not much he could do about it. But he takes this woman to be a wife and he marries her and they have two children. So this is Manasseh and Ephraim. And these round out, by the way, the 12 tribes that will go into Israel that will have a land inheritance. Because Joseph would not go in, so there's two of him. That means there's one too many, but remember that Levi doesn't get a land inheritance. So there's 12 tribes as they go into the land of Israel, and the land is divided up amongst these 12. All right? Any questions? Anybody got anything they want to say before we continue on? All right. So let's. I tell you what. Let's finish it. Then there's something else I want to talk about. All right. I want you to notice that all of the children, all of these children, are considered part of Israel's nation promise. All of the sons of the favorite wife, Rachel. All of the sons of the hated wife, Leah. Hated does not mean that he despised her. It just simply meant that he didn't regard her the way he did Rachel. That's in the Hebrew, right? That's not in the English. In the English, it says hated. That's not what it means in the Hebrew. All right. It also talks about the sons of the servant woman. It's interesting that Abraham will listen to his wife Sarah. She said, "I didn't want my son inheriting with this son of this servant woman." But in this, God doesn't make any distinction. The sons of the servant women were considered as well as the sons of the actual wives that Jacob had. So God didn't make any distinction. And neither should we. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that go away. You know, once upon a time, society was very, very cruel towards children that were considered quote unquote illegitimate. And there's not a single child that's illegitimate. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense to God. Doesn't make sense to us. And I like the fact that a child is not put away for the sins of the parents. It shouldn't happen that way anyway. Child is not legitimate. Children are always legitimate children. They're kids. They're made in the image of God. All right. So around 70 of Jacob's household enters Egypt. Around 2.3 million leave during the Exodus. Now, how do we get to that number? It's said that 600,000 men are in the company that leaves during the Exodus. So you extrapolate a little bit from that, add in wives, add in children, and the number that's usually thrown around is about 2 to 3 million. Now, the interesting thing is the population of Egypt at the time of Moses, and there is absolutely no way to be scientifically sure of this. I looked, and I looked, and I looked, and I looked. It's just not found. Many anthropologists, as they look through the story and all of the things that are written both during that time and after that time, they believe that the population during the time of Moses was around 4 to 5 million. And when you think about when 2 to 3 of those leave, as well as all of Pharaoh's army and every armed man that would go out with him, what kind of population drain would that be in just a very short period of time? I mean, it would devastate. It would absolutely devastate a country. When you take, what was it I saw in World War I? After World War I, I think it took something like 30 years for the population levels to come back up to where they were pre-World War I. That many young men were killed, and that's all these young men that would be getting married and having families. So you can think for a while after this Exodus, the nation of Egypt was going to be so diminished, and that's why it fell several times to outside forces. They saw that Egypt was weakened. They didn't necessarily conquer it, but it was kind of like Israel with the nations that surrounded it. When it was perceived to be weak, you would have people who would take advantage of that, and we're going to go in, we're going to make raids, we're going to take, then we'll get back out again. That happened to Egypt quite a bit after the time frame that the Exodus is generally believed to have occurred. All right? So, but only 70 go in, and around 2 to 3 million leave. So when God says, I'm going to make of you a great nation while you're there, he was serious, wasn't he? He made it very clear. And you can imagine while they're going, you don't really realize, I don't know that, it doesn't say that they were taking a census while this was going on. Now we know how many left with him, but it doesn't show anywhere where the Israelites, or the Hebrews, while they're living in Egypt, are paying any attention to this. They're not writing it down and taking notes and jotting, taking little tally marks, how many people are living. They just, it's like they went down as a small group, and then they began to expand and grow. And before they knew it, they're outnumbering the Egyptians. They said they're too many. They outnumber us. We can't, what we have to do is we have to systematically enslave them so that they will not rise up and take advantage. So, all right, anybody got anything they want to say? Anything they want to add? All right, real quick. So we go to verse 28. Now Jacob sends Judah ahead on the pathway to show the way before him. In other words, to put markers out, show this is the direction that we need to head. We're going to a specific place. We're not just trying to get to Egypt. We're trying to get to a specific place where we're going to see your son. So he sends him ahead of him so that he can get to the right place. And he looks at it and he says, the way before him in Goshen. And let's see. I think I've got a. Let me see where this is. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go to. We'll go back to that, I promise. All right. That's the best I could find. So Goshen is an area. It's not a town. It's an area, and the land of Goshen encompassed all of this were the headwaters of the Nile, and here's the Nile right here. So these are all of these rivers that are coming in, all of them creating the Nile River. And this is what would happen is every year, a couple of times a year, the Nile River would flood and it would overflow, and that's what caused all of this green. All of these rivers would swell, they would spill over their banks, and so what they would do is they would plant. So everything around here would flood, and it created just enormous amounts of produce and greenery and grain, and this is where all these people were growing when Joseph was collecting all of that 20% for those 7 years. It was all there at the top. What's also happening up there are people that are shepherding flocks, and they're pasturing animals. And we'll see here in just a couple of moments why that was so important. All right, so he says, in a couple of seconds, we'll see where it talks about Ramses, and that's that's this little town right here. It's believed, by the way, that the Hebrews were not building the pyramids. I know that's popular in movies. That's not what they were doing. It actually says they were building storehouses. And so what Pharaoh is looking forward to is what if this happens next time? So he puts them to work building these storehouses along the Nile River all the way down, right? And that's what happens, of course, later on when the Pharaoh arises that doesn't know Joseph that we talked about, or that we will talk about. All right. So that's where that is. So they're coming from right here. They're traveling down this pathway right here. This is the Negev, and then they're going to go in, and they're going to come in right about here is here. All right? Okay. So let me go back. I want to make sure we get this. All right. All right, so you can imagine when Jacob, you can imagine when Jacob gets to Egypt and he goes to this place where Joseph is distributing grain. He's overseeing all of this activity on behalf of Pharaoh. You can imagine what that was like for him. Just think about this for a couple of moments. When he last laid eyes on Joseph, he was sending him to find his brothers in Shechem. And how was he likely dressed? Well, he was dressed in his coat of many colors because Joseph's not going to leave that behind. He's going to wear that coat because it shows who he is and how important he is to his father. But what is he dressed like? He's dressed like a shepherd, right? He looks a particular way, and that's one of the reasons that the scripture says that the shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians, because they looked the part. They were rugged. They had the long beards that were unkempt. They smelled. Has anybody ever been in a herd of sheep or flock of sheep? Flock of sheep. Have you ever been in proximity to a flock of sheep? Any kind of animal, there's always that smell that goes along with them. But when you're living with them and pasturing them and you're with them all of the time, basically 24 hours a day, all of a sudden you pick up that scent, and all of a sudden people know, like, I know where you've been, I know what you do for a living. So this is what he saw now you can imagine as he sees Joseph now sitting in a place of honor, overseeing all of this activity, having the ring of Pharaoh on his hand, being completely clean-shaven, which would have been the case of any well-to-do Egyptian man. The head would have been shaved, no facial hair whatsoever. He would have gold. He would likely have earrings. He would have this ring on his hand. He would be dressed in the finest Egyptian linen, which still is very highly prized. That has never gone away. So, in his mind's eye, he's thinking of Joseph in a very particular way. He says, "I remember what he looked like," as every parent would. If they think that their child is gone, they're going to remember exactly what they looked like the last time they saw him. And remember, how do you think he still has that robe, that coat of many colors with that blood-soaked robe? There's no doubt in my mind. He still has that somewhere. He's packed that. He's not going to let that go. That's his only reminder of his son. So now, he has this picture in his mind's eye of what Joseph looked like. And now, as they go, they come upon Joseph in his Egyptian guise and all of his finery and everything that makes he is so completely changed from what Jacob understood and from what Jacob knew. He's speaking, no doubt, fluent Egyptian, so he whether he even understands what's going on. Here he sees this young man that was at the time, depending on where you stand on this, could have been his youngest son at the time. It could be Benjamin was born. We're not going to get into that too much. But that could have been his youngest son, and he knows what his youngest son was like, but now look what he looks like. So you can imagine it's just a little bit of shock to see this happening. Here you have this young guy, and now all of a sudden, he's the head guy in charge. He's the main guy other than the Pharaoh. All right? So we see that there's this emotional reunion, right? He says, they come into the land of Goshen. Joseph prepares his chariot, goes up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presents himself to him. The idea here is, even though Joseph occupies this very high echelon position in Pharaoh's government, he still presents himself to Jacob. He still acknowledges his father as having that superiority that comes with being his father, the patriarchy. He says, you no matter where I am, you're still, because you're my father, you occupy this position, and no matter what I may be, you're still up here. So he presents himself, and that's always in this, and that's always in the understanding of an inferior presenting himself to a superior. See, God doesn't present himself to me. I present myself to God. God stays where he is, and I go to him rather than him come to me. So, all right. So he presents himself to Jacob, and he falls on his neck, and he wept on his neck a good while. Don't know how long that is. I can imagine after that many years, it was probably not a matter of, hey, good to see you. There's a lot of weeping and crying and commiserating and comforting and so forth and so on. All right. So he does this for a good while, and it's interesting. Joseph doesn't care who sees this. He has no problem with anyone seeing him openly weeping on his father's neck, which is, I think that's probably a good thing. So Israel, verse 30, Israel says to Joseph, "Now let me die." Before he said, I can die now that I know that my son is alive, I can die happy. Now, he says this again, he says, "Now let me die. Let me die since I have seen your face and I know that you are still alive." I think this is alluding to what he's going to say to Pharaoh here in just a couple of chapters. Because he makes a very interesting statement to Pharaoh when Pharaoh engages him Jacob for the first time. But he says, "Let me die. If I died right now, I will be content. Nothing else bad can happen that can happen to me. I'll be happy if I just pass on at this moment." Right? And I don't think he's just exaggerating for the point of making a point. I think he genuinely means this. His life has been long and it's been hard, and he said, all my sons, all 12 of them are alive. Everything's good. I know they're going to be taken care of. I can relinquish this responsibility that I've had for all of these years of riding herd on these 12 contentious boys on 4 contentious wives, and all of these issues, I can now lay this down and go in peace to God. Make sense? I think it makes sense. I understand that. I know my grandfather, when he passed, he said that. He said, I can let go now. It's like, yeah, you can let go now. We got this. We got this, granddad. Go be with God. We got this. And that's how he died, knowing that he could, in good conscience, finally let go. The last thing he wanted to do is he exacted a promise from about 4 people to take care of my grandmother. And once they did that, he was happy to fold his tent, as he said. All right, real quick, verse 31. Joseph says to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up. So he's bringing this responsibility on himself. I will go up, and I will tell Pharaoh, and I will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. Now, he's not telling him something he doesn't already know. He's saying that this has happened, because we're not given to know what the time frame is between when Joseph sent his brothers back with the wagons and the time that they've come. This is not a weekend trip. This is not something they went and packed up real quickly and real quick we can get this done. No, this probably took months, maybe. So you told me to do this. You sent them with the wagons. I'm going to go and say, hey, it's been accomplished, and kind of prepare the way, because remember, Pharaoh is still head guy in charge of Egypt. So he's going to have to kind of get them ready to go and present themselves to the most powerful man at this point, the most powerful man in the known world. Powerful because not only is he the head of Egypt, he's a god king of Egypt, but also he has life and death in his hands because of his ability to give or not give grain and food during the famine. So this is a very, very powerful man. And you don't just walk up and say, hey, can I come in? All right? You're going to have to prepare yourself. So he says, I'm going to go and do this. And look what he says in verse 32. He says, and the men are shepherds. So this is what he's going to tell Pharaoh, and we'll see why this is important. The men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. Why is this important? When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock. Let me get to this. All right? Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now. Both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So Joseph extracts a promise from his brothers and from his father. And when he asks what you do, you tell him that you are shepherds. You have to tell him that you're shepherds. It's certainly not a lie, because that's exactly what they've been doing. That's what they've always done. They sojourn. It's one of the best occupations if you're a shepherd, is to sojourn. So the question then is, why would Joseph ask this of Jacob and his brothers? Why would he make this not necessarily a condition, but he makes this very, very specific point that that's what they're supposed to do. It kind of speaks to what we talked about earlier about why Jacob might have been worried about going down into Egypt. Anybody got any ideas? Yeah.
Maybe to keep them separated?
Separated why?
Away from the Egyptians?
Okay. If you're an abomination, now the idea of abomination here, I want to make sure you understand, abomination here is not the kind of abomination that we think of in, for example, the idea of a false god, the worship of a false god, or the claiming of a false god, or the practice of worship of a false god, or anything like that. The idea of an abomination is something that is separate. The Egyptians did not want to live in, amongst, around, close to, next to, by, neighborhood of a shepherd. Why? Because kind of what we talked about earlier. What did a shepherd look like? They were rough, they were rugged, they wore clothes that, when you're grabbing a hold of a sheep, they're nasty, you get all over the place. They had long, woolly beards. They weren't very well kept. They smelled, so forth and so on. Oh, I tell you what, we'll stop here. We're going to stop right here. I know I hate to do that, but I want to make sure we don't go over time because we only get so many minutes on this recording. So let's stop right here, and then we'll pick back up at 7. All right? All right.
Hey.
It is 7 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. We see where Joseph has exacted a promise from Jacob and his brothers that when Pharaoh asks them what they do, they say they're going to be shepherds. He says, so that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. So part of this is the idea that Pharaoh would not expel them, number one. Number two, that they would live in a particular place. And we mentioned right before the break the idea about why would Joseph, why would this be a thing? Why would Joseph, I would say demand, but why would it be of concern to him where his kinsmen would end up living? And there's several different things. Number one, Jim mentioned this, the idea that Egypt is a land of idolaters, in the sense that do you want your family caught up in living farther south where they may be caught up in Egyptian culture and may be pulled away? Because we mentioned this at the very beginning. All right? So there's that. Part of it is that they would be left alone if they are, quote unquote, an abomination. The Egyptians are not going to try to intermarry with them or intermingle with them. They're going to be left to their own devices up there in Upper Egypt at the headwaters of the Nile. They'll basically be a nation in and of and unto themselves, and they won't have to deal with the Egyptians coming up and trying to be a part of their lives. They'll be left to their own devices, so to speak. That's a couple of different reasons that would certainly fly if we had to really come up with an idea about why. A definitive answer. I think those two things would be very high up on the list. All right, this is why. I want you to live there. Don't want you to have to worry about the Egyptians. They're not going to require anything of you. You're going to get to pasture your flocks, and you're going to be on your own, so to speak. Okay? So he says, let's see, for every shepherd is an abomination. You know, he doesn't say Hebrew is an abomination. He says every shepherd is an abomination. It's very difficult to call a Hebrew an abomination when Joseph is a Hebrew and he's second in command in Egypt. All right, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Come back here. All right, there we go. All right, so we had the reading. I want to drop back because I want to ask a couple of things. I want you to think about this, the idea of... there we go. The formation of Joseph. I'm not talking about how God put him together, so to speak, but kind of, really, how God put Joseph together. The idea here is that Joseph was, as many of us are, formed, or I shouldn't say how we are, but how our character, so to speak, is formed in what's known as a crucible. All right. You might tell me what a crucible is? What's that?
Like melting lead or something? Or?
It is. It's essentially a crucible is a bowl. Let's just call it what it is. It's a bowl, and a crucible is something that's made out of an inert metal that won't melt the same as what you're putting into it. So you would put something like, for along lines, if you want to do gold ingots, you would take your scrap gold, you would take your necklaces, whatever it may be, and you would put them into this crucible, and you would heat this crucible, superheat this crucible. The gold would melt, and then you would pour it out into these little forms of ingots. And you could do the same thing with silver, you could do it with aluminum, you could do it with lead or copper, whatever it is, I mean, whatever kind of metal that you're talking about. And that crucible allows you to superheat it, and then it forms. You can turn it into liquid, and you can turn it into whatever shape you want. All right. So when we talk about Joseph being formed in this crucible, you know, his story only comprises about 23 chapters, which is almost half of the book of Genesis is caught up in the narrative of Joseph. And what's interesting is after you get out of the book of Genesis, Joseph is only mentioned 2 or 3 times in the rest of the Old Testament, 2 or 3 times in the New Testament. But he's not brought out, he's not trotted out in the stories the way that Abraham is, or Moses is, or David is, although his part in Genesis is almost outsized. He said all of these other guys, they were promised these promises by God But Joseph is the one that brought them and kept them from complete destruction through a famine. So he does these great works, but he's really after the account of Genesis. It's just sort of people forget who he is, but he's just not brought out as some great example. They talk about his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, but they don't really talk about Joseph that much. So let's think about this. I actually have it down here. I didn't even realize I had it down here. All right, 7 times throughout the rest of the Old Testament, only 3 times in the New Testament. Okay, so you would think that someone with this kind of outsized role in the book would be mentioned more, but it's not. But Joseph has been referred to as the Savior of the world. How's that so? Right? He saved the people who would bring the Christ into the world. So he's the Savior of the world. But the narrative of Joseph is often criticized for not adhering to the framework of the rest of Genesis. It's unusual. It's interesting in the way that it seems like almost like you have 2 very separate, disparate stories that have been tacked together. We know that's not the case, but that's what it seems like. And a lot of people criticize it. It's like it doesn't flow like the rest of the narrative does. It's just interesting in the way it feels like it's been tacked on. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the accounts of the patriarchs. Because really, you leave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then you concentrate on this one son from these guys, and it talks about him and his life for a period of time. And even then, afterwards, Joseph kind of melts away, and you have Jacob's dealings with the rest of his sons when he goes into this blessing. Okay, so it's been criticized. Now, I'm not saying it's accurate because I don't think it's entirely true. For a lot of people, the Joseph account, the account that we find at the end of the book of Genesis, is almost an antitype to the account that we see throughout Genesis 1:11. All right. So what does this mean? Let's look and we'll see. I'll let you finish writing this down if you want to take it down. I don't want to flip too quick. I think next time I'm going to put fewer points per slide. You're like, I can't write all this down. And by the way, if you want these slides at the end of the thing, after I get it completely done, if you want the slides, the information is not going to change. I can certainly give you the file for the slides if you really want that. But your notes are probably going to be as good or better as anything else because you're going to take out other stuff. But I'm happy to share that. Okay. So the Joseph account is almost an antitype to the typical account that we find Genesis 1:11. So here, what's an example? Well, think about this: Cain and Abel. All right, Cain and Abel. What happens to Cain and Abel? You have these 2 brothers. One, the innocent party, has no beef with the other party. Right? We don't see anywhere where Abel criticizes Cain. We don't see anywhere where Abel confronts him or is arrogant in the way that he deals with him. We see Cain's account, and really Abel is sort of like this passive character in the background. Abel is I wouldn't say innocent, but he certainly is not the criminal here. He's certainly not the sinful one here. Abel's simply, feeding his sheep, and then he brings one and he offers it to God, and then from that point on, he's sort of this passive participant. And now we see Cain, who is what we would call the villain of the story, and now is angry with Abel for, I guess, showing him up, even though we don't see where that actually happens. He's envious, he's jealous of Abel's standing before God now, because it says that God showed favor towards it, but we don't see anywhere where Abel does anything to Cain, but we see where Cain actually certainly does something to Cain. Or Cain certainly does something to Abel, right? So we have these 2 brothers with this fraternal conflict, and it results in murder. That's what, at the end of the day, that's exactly what happens. So now you have Joseph and his brethren. All right, then you have this fraternal conflict, but at the end of the day, between Joseph and his brothers, what ends up happening at the very end? What do? They beg forgiveness. They are, by all accounts, sorrowful for what they've done. Remember, they've had many, many years to sit and stew in their guilt. So for about 13 years, they're reliving that viewpoint of when they sell their brother and they take that money and what did they do with that money? They split it up. What would you possibly do with the wages of blood wages? How would you spend that? So they've divided that up and they watch their brother being loaded, bound on a cart for parts unknown. They have no idea where he's going. And as far as they know, and as far as they may have convinced themselves, Joseph is dead. But at the end of the day, what do we find? In the account of Joseph and his brethren, we find forgiveness and salvation. Joseph forgives his brothers, and in his forgiveness says, I want you to come live with me. I'm going to do unto you what I would want you to do unto me. Not what you did, but what I would want you to do for me. All right, so you have this typical and atypical, or antitype and type that we're talking about here. Okay, so Joseph goes from prince, which he certainly was in his father's household, right? He was the favorite son. He was the one that was going to get the best. He was the one that was going to receive the most. He was the one that he was the apple of his father's eye. Loved him so much, not that he hated his other sons, but he loved Joseph more. And he makes him this coat of many colors. And he does not call Joseph down when Joseph probably very arrogantly displays his supposed superiority after the dreams. He doesn't do anything. He is a prince in his father's house. So he goes from being a prince to a prisoner to a prince again in a very short period of time, around 13 years. So what is Joseph's crucible? What formed Joseph? What brought him? What at the end of the day, when this prince of Egypt pops out at the end, what formed this prince of Egypt that we read about in the last 4 or 5 chapters of the book of Genesis? All right. So we got number one thing. We got favoritism by the father. Now you think favoritism? Well, surely that would be a good thing, right? That would lead to good things. That would lead to positive consequences. There certainly couldn't be anything wrong or bad happen with favoritism until, of course, you read the account. What favoritism did. All right? It broke a family. Literally broke a family. Right? It sent a father into deep mourning for a long period of time, thinking that not that he died after an illness that he was able to fight off and then and die in the presence of his family and they're taking care of him. No. He went, and think about how guilty his father went. I sent him there. I sent him away from me to find his brothers, and now he's died at the teeth and claws of a wild animal. So Jacob feels guilt. And his brothers feel guilt. All of that due to favoritism by his father. Then you have hostile brothers, all right? And nothing was ever done about that. No reprimand, no castigation by the father. It was just they were allowed to behave the way that they behaved, and they were never called to account for their hostility towards Joseph. And Jacob, of course, certainly didn't do them any favors by not doing some of the things that he should have done as a father. All right? Then, remember when he gets to his brethren, before he even got there, they'd already decided what they were going to do. They'd already thought in their minds, this is what we can do. So they grab him as soon as he gets there and they throw him into a pit. All right? So it wasn't even a matter of, hey, let's sit around the fire and let's talk about it. And hey, we got something we want to discuss with you. It was like as soon as he got there, they grabbed him, they threw him into a pit, and for all intents and purposes, they were going to do what to him? They were going to kill him. They'd already decided. Listen, then we'll see what happens to his dreams. All right. So you have this hostility of the brethren. Then you have this captivity in a pit. Then you have him sold as a chattel slave. And the idea of chattel slave means he is somebody's property to be done with whatever. So he could have been sold to a master who was hostile and aggressive, and he could have been killed at a moment's notice for all the slave master cared. So that could have happened to him. So you have all of these things happen. So not only does he have favoritism by his father, he has hostile brothers, he has captivity in a pit. He's sold as a chattel slave. Then, not only that, he is sold to heathen Egyptians. So he's sold to his brethren, which was unthinkable, because he was sold to who? He was sold to brethren, right? Who were his brethren? Who were the Midianites? They were from where? They were from Edom. So this was his brothers. They were brothers by birth. They all came from the same man, right? Abraham. All right, so he's been sold to his brothers. Now he's going into his brothers take him, and rather than restore him, which they should have done, they buy him and then they sell him to these pagan Egyptians. Right? He's heathen, the unwashed, the uncircumcised is what they would have been called. All right, so now you're in a land that you don't know. You're surrounded by these false gods. You're living in a place, and at any moment you have no idea. You don't speak the language. You don't know what's going to happen to you. So all of these things are happening. God. Now, the good thing is, God. The only thing that preserved. It's interesting. If all of this had happened and God was not with Joseph through all of this, what kind of person would have popped out at the other end of all of this experience? What would have happened if, say, for example, you think about yourself. If all of these things had happened and 13 years later, where do you think you would be if all of these things had occurred to you? Logically, now.
Resentment.
Oh, resentment, certainly. What else? Bitter, like angry, bitter. Just, the world is against me and I hate the world. I hate my brethren. I hate everybody. I hate God. This is just, and that's how we would be. We always like to think, well, I would be the exception. You probably are not going to be the exception. You're going to be like everybody else. Yep.
Didn't God give him the dreams to begin with?
Yes.
So he probably wouldn't have had, I think the dreams aggravated his brothers to the point of really wanting to do him in. And if you look at actually the narrative, the dreams, mine and yours, and it just seems. When you say favoritism, I think to some degree, did God have favoritism toward Joseph?
I don't know if it's necessary. I think that God. Let's put it this way. Was it favoritism? I think it depends on how we determine favoritism. Is it did Jacob show favoritism with Rachel and Leah? Yeah. What kind of favoritism did he show? Because there's a difference. There's some people that's like, I say for example, you look at two guys and one of them is blessed with certain talents and the other one is not blessed with those talents. And then you would have to think about the idea, well, what does it mean when God showed favoritism to Joseph? In what way do we want to define that idea of favoritism? Now, one thing we don't, it doesn't say specifically. We know where it came from, but does Joseph know that the dreams are from God? Or did he simply wake up having had the dream and then not knowing exactly what it is, but he likes what it seems like, right? My sheaf was standing there and your sheaves bowed down to mine. Not knowing what that means, but the idea of, well, mine was the superior one. Yours bowed down to mine. Yeah. And oh, by the way, my star and yours, they bowed down to mine. Now we don't know. It doesn't show. It doesn't give us to tell. It doesn't tell us that he knew they were from God. It's just simply there were dreams that he had that sounded really good to him because it allowed him. It kind of maybe confirmed what he thought, what he understood, is that his father. He was favored in his father, and now it's kind of been confirmed in these dreams where he's been elevated in some way and he doesn't know what it is. But we also know that he invokes God, right? He said, how can you, when he talks to Potiphar's wife, he said, how can you ask me to do this thing against my master and against my God? So Joseph has this in his mind from the very beginning. It's kind of what we get into why did he want his brethren removed from the other Egyptians? Because he still knew God. He knew what God was. He knew that he didn't want his brethren to fall sway to these false gods. I want to keep them removed from everything else. They're going to be there, and that way we can make sure that we keep loyal. We keep the proper worship of God. I think certainly that falls into it.
Yeah, I think we can all say that God wasn't favoring Joseph.
Yeah.
But he was definitely influencing his dreams.
Yes.
To the point of, contributing to this.
Yes. And I don't want to dismiss the idea that was God showing favoritism. I think he certainly showed favor. I think he showed favoritism to Joseph, but not in a way that he felt that Joseph was better than. But, there's a reason that God called Moses and not Aaron. He could just as easily have called his brother-in-law. and said, hey, I want you to go do this. He said, but God saw something specific to Moses that he wanted. There's something there. And it could be that Joseph would be the one that would remain. We see where his brother's behavior. Would any of his brothers have been as quick to turn down Potiphar's wife as Joseph? Maybe. I don't know. Good question. But I do believe that God did show favoritism to Joseph, at least in a certain capacity, because he's the one that he was going to work through. He's the one that sent the dreams, even if Joseph didn't know that those were who were sending them the dreams in the first place. It's interesting that because Jacob has had a dream with God. It's interesting that we don't read where Jacob says, it says that he pondered those things, he thought about them, he remembered them, but he doesn't try to explain to Joseph or try to work through those things with Joseph, or even go to God and say, did you talk to my son? Just let me know here if you're talking to him about something that's going on. I'd like to know. But we don't find that in the account, the narrative. But all of these things are part of what we would call that crucible. That they're cooking him. They're melting him down from what he was. And they're putting out the end result is going to be these disparate parts, all of these things coming together, and it's going to be poured out into this mold, and this mold is going to be this man Joseph that we read about. And it is interesting that it's not like the rest of the book at all. It's very unique in the way that it's presented to the reader. So anyway, he's sold to these Egyptians, and then of course he's cast into prison, and then it's almost like the turnaround is so quick. It would remind you of like certain movies that you watch where the hero is just beaten down, and there's this one chance encounter that flips the script, and then all of a sudden everything changes for the good. And a lot of times you watch these movies and go, oh, come on, that doesn't happen like that. But here we read the account where it literally does happen just like that. He's laboring in prison, he's suffering. I would say he's suffering, but he's not where he wants to be. He's still in captivity. He's still living in a prison. He doesn't have his freedom. He's separated from his family. And there he is until this chance encounter with these other prisoners result in his being released even 2 years after the fact. That's okay. So here we are. All right, so he separated his family. He's sojourning as his father did. It's essentially what it is. Joseph is in a land that's not his, and he's going through all of this stuff. And the question is, what is this crucible for? Well, it is certainly a type of Christ, certainly so. He goes before them to prepare a place for them, and then he brings them to himself. Sounds like Christ to me. So we certainly have an antitype or a type of Christ in Joseph, certainly. All right. Anybody got anything they want to add? I'll try not to monopolize, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to say something if they want to. All right. Let's go a little bit further then. We already know all this. All right, so let's go to chapter. All right, let's go to 47. Chapter 47. All right. So Joseph has said, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to Pharaoh, and this is what you're going to tell him. So then Joseph goes in and he tells Pharaoh. And again, this is one of those interesting things about the book. You find a lot of these things. It's like they're going to tell you what's going to happen, and then it's going to happen, and then they're going to tell you what just happened. All right. So this is what's occurring right here. Joseph goes in and he tells Pharaoh exactly what he said he was going to tell him, or he tell his brothers he was going to tell him. My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. So if Joseph goes back to Pharaoh, Pharaoh does not come to Joseph. All right. Remember, you present yourself to the superior. So Joseph goes and he presents himself to his master, so to speak, which is Pharaoh. And from among his brothers, he took 5 men. Probably the oldest 5, but I guarantee you Benjamin was in there because that's his favorite, right? So he takes 5 men and he presents them to Pharaoh. So they would go in and they would be changed, they would be clothed in the correct manner, they would look the part before he goes and he brings them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to his 5 brothers, "What is your occupation?" He said he was going to ask him that. He says, this is what he's going to ask you, and this is what you're going to tell him. And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." So not only did he tell them what Pharaoh was going to ask, they said exactly what he said, what he told them to say. We're shepherds, like our fathers were and the fathers before them. All right. So we have come to sojourn in the land, for there's no pasture. So they make it very clear that this is not our home. This is not be permanent for us, but we're going to sojourn here until the time comes for us to leave. And that's exactly what happens. They are sojourners there for what they say, they might be thinking is a very short period of time. They're thinking, hey, this is going to end, and we're going to go back into Canaan. That's not what happens. They die before all of this happens. So it says, we are sojourning in the land. There's no pasture, for the famine is severe. Now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Now this is Pharaoh talking to Joseph, not to the brothers. That would not have been thinkable. That he's going to speak to Joseph. He says, the land of Egypt is before you. In other words, there's nothing withheld from you. You put them wherever you want them to be. So he says, settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Well, for them, the best of the land was in the land of Goshen, as were reasons we talked about earlier. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know of any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So not only is he giving them the fat of the land, he's giving them employment. And these guys know shepherding, don't they? The whole family knows shepherding. I think at this point they're probably experts. They know everything there's possibly to know about shepherding flocks. And not just sheep, but goats and camels and donkeys and everything you can imagine. They know how to shepherd. They've done it before. So then Joseph brings in, so he's presented his brothers, right? He's presented his brothers to Pharaoh. Now he brings him Jacob, his father. And I like this. He doesn't say he presents him to Pharaoh, does he? What's the wording there? He stood him before. He stood him before Pharaoh. Interesting. Why is that interesting? Tell me why I think that's interesting. Because when you, yeah.
I mean, typically, if you're going to Pharaoh, wouldn't you be in a submissive form?
Okay.
And if he's taking his dad and putting him before him in an upright, it's almost like equal.
See, there it is. Because remember what it says, that Joseph goes and he takes his brothers and presents them. In other words, they are inferiors to a superior. All right? And when he went to Jacob, he presented himself to Jacob in a submissive way to one that he would consider to be superior. But he doesn't do that with Jacob. When he takes his father, he presents them in his mind are at least equals. Likely, Jacob would be considered the superior, but that would have been unthinkable to present Pharaoh to Jacob. So what does he do? He presents them as equals. He stands him before Pharaoh. So Pharaoh and Jacob is not assuming any kind of submissive position here at all. He's not bowing. He's not prostrating himself. He's not doing anything other than standing in front of Pharaoh. And I think I like this. I don't know what it is about it, but I like the idea of Jacob walking into the most powerful man in the world at that time and looking at him eye to eye as an equal, so to speak. And we're going to see why also that's important here in just a couple minutes. You got something you want to say?
It's a matter of respect, too, for his father, right? I mean, to
Absolutely.
show him, hey, listen, you are in front of Pharaoh, but you are still my father.
That's right.
And I have the utmost respect for you.
Yeah. And I believe because of Joseph's position, I believe because of Joseph's knowledge, Joseph knows that his father is not the inferior of any man on earth. Pharaoh never spoke with God. Pharaoh was never promised by God that he would become a great nation. He was never promised land. As far as Joseph's concerned, he is the king of a foreign nation, but a pagan foreign nation. And he is worthy of the respect due him, but not anything more than that. Jacob, on the other hand, is favored by God and has been blessed with certain promises that are going to come to him regardless. See, Pharaoh could die next week and everything would change. Jacob, on the other hand, has a pathway that has been set by God, which is, I think, important to understand. All right? So, yeah, Jacob is there because Joseph knows that Jacob is not the inferior of any man standing in that throne room. As a matter of fact, he knows that he is inferior to his own father. All right? So, Joseph brings in Jacob his father and stands him before Pharaoh. And look, Jacob blesses Pharaoh. All right. So here we got two things. You got Pharaoh that is the entire land is before you. You are an honored guest, and Jacob. Where would the blessing come? It comes from the superior to the inferior. Jacob blesses his sons. Right. That's what we find. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Melchizedek was the superior. He was a priest of God. So Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Now we have Jacob blessing Pharaoh. The blessing would come from the superior to the inferior. Now, Joseph could never say that, and Jacob would never make a point of it. But I think it's important to note in the narrative that this is what's going on. This is what's happening. We know who's the most important person in that room. All right? So he brings in Jacob. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Doesn't say exactly what it is. It's likely bless you for doing the things that you're doing, and so forth and so on. But Pharaoh says to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? So in other words, how old are you? You know, somebody asks that now, we get a little offended, don't we? You know, how old are you? Like, what do you mean? Why do you need to know? Guys probably a little less so than ladies, but when we get to certain points, like we don't want to be asked how old we are. It's nobody's business. We don't need to look at it in this way. This was a question of utmost respect. Pharaoh was obviously younger than Jacob, so he understood that this is a man with some age and some wisdom and some experience. So he's asking him something that would be considered a very pertinent question and a very honorable question, right? How old are you? And so what does he say? He says, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. That's not from the time he started sojourning, because he's always been a sojourner. He was a sojourner in the house of his father. So he says, the days of my sojourning, I am 130 years old, essentially. And look at this. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. He makes a very pointed, a salient point here. He says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Why would he say something like that? What do you think about? He qualifies it. He says, I'm 130 years, but the days have been short and the days have been evil. And then he goes on to say, he says, I haven't lived as old as my father or my grandfather. And he doesn't, right? He dies at 147. Abraham lived to be 175 and Isaac lived to be 180 years old. So he's not even going to live as long as his father and his grandfather. But he says, my days have been few and evil. Why would he say something like that? Think about what Jacob's life has been from the time he was old enough to find a spouse.
That's what his life has been.
His life has been it has been a tumultuous, dysfunctional, difficult time. He had one wife that he thought, and then he realized that that's not the one. Then he had another spouse. So he's got two wives, two sisters, and when sisters get old enough, they don't need to be living in the same house, much less married to the same man. Yeah.
Well, it's been one deception after another too.
Very, very good.
He
So
deceived his brother.
Yeah.
Then he was deceived by his father-in-law.
Yep.
And then his own children deceived him about Joseph.
So he has a twin brother, and that's true. We need to go back a little ways, don't we? It didn't start with him marrying the two sisters, did it? It started before that. And I had a friend who was a twin, and he said, you see, every once in a while you get those twins that are like super close and just really tight with one another. He said, my brother and I were not like that. He said, we fought all the time. We always took offense at something. If somebody said something, it was like, why'd you say that to him and not to me? Or why'd you say that to me and not to him? And it was just this constant battle of superiority, trying to get one up on one another. He said it was like that until we got old enough that we didn't live close to one another anymore. And then we became good friends. But this is the case. So you've got these twin brothers that we don't see necessarily where they are at odds with one another before, but we know that there was favoritism going on between Isaac and Rebekah, right? So you had Isaac that favored his older brother. So there's going to be turmoil, as we saw with Jacob. So there's turmoil going on there. So was that going on their entire lives? Most likely. And then we see where he gets real clever and he takes away his brother's birthright. And then later, with the help of his mother, or at the instigation of his mother, he steals his brother's blessing. So there's been turmoil from the very beginning, and then he basically goes on the run for his life, goes all the way to Haran, finds a spouse, right? But then he's cheated by his father-in-law. So now he's married to 2 women when he really was only interested in the one. Then one can't bear children, the other one starts taunting the other one by having child after child after child. And then you got 2 handmaidens that are thrown into it, and he has children with them. Then finally his wife, his true wife, the one that he's supposed to be married to, finally gives him a son after all of these years. So when we think about this, I'm not sure about the days have been few, but they've certainly been a struggle. At the very least, we can call it a struggle. The idea of evil here, it means that. It doesn't mean it was sinful necessarily. It means that they were not happy. They were not joyful the way they should have been. If he had done things the right way, he probably would have had a lot more pleasant, happy, I wouldn't say carefree, but certainly not as antagonistic as his life has been almost from the very beginning. All right. So when he's talking to this, I always thought that was very interesting that he said, my days have been few and evil. But when you start recounting Jacob's life, the one that we actually read more about than anybody other than Joseph, as far as the patriarch is concerned, we get it. We understand. I know why he would call them few and evil. And he was absolutely true. All right, so he says, my days have been few and evil, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my father. I'm not even as old as they are, and my life has been one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. So Jacob blesses Pharaoh, and then he goes out from the presence of Pharaoh. All right, so he's presented his brethren, and now he's presented his father, and now essentially it's, okay, let's get you guys settled. Let's figure out where you need to be, and we'll make sure that everybody's taken care of. Is everybody accounted for? All right, well, you're going to get this part, you're going to get this area, you're going to get this portion. So Joseph settles his fathers and his brother, and he gave them a possession in the land of Egypt. Now, the idea of possession doesn't mean that they own it. It simply means that it's under their control for the period of time that they're there. So he gives them a possession of the land of Egypt and the best of the land and the land of Ramses, as we showed in the map here just a couple moments ago, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all of his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. So they have this allowance of grain. They're not worried about meat because they have flocks, but they are not farmers. You don't engage in farming as a sojourner. You're on the move all the time pasturing flocks, so you don't produce produce. Okay? So that what was necessary was delivered to them from the treasury, from the storehouses that Joseph was in charge of. Right? So when Joseph said, I'm going to take care of you, he meant it. And he absolutely does. There's nothing that they're in want of. That's why they're able to grow the way they're able to grow. They're not worried. They're not scared. Hey, this meal may be your last one. What are we going to do now? Sell everything we have. We got to have the food. We got to have the food. They're taken care of, and in all the right ways. All right, so let's go real quick to. There's another little side account of what Joseph is doing during all of this. In verse 13, of course, it says there's no food in the land. The famine is very severe. So this is in the very worst of the famine. This is when it's at its absolute apex. This is when it's when there hasn't been food in 2 or 3 years, and there's still several years more to go in regards to not having any kind of harvest. It says, so the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by the reason of the famine. Now, position has its privilege. His family's not worried about it, but the rank and file, the average citizen of Egypt, the Egyptian citizens, they're desperate. It's really, really bad. So what happens? Joseph gathers up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain. So what does he end up doing? Joseph ends up taking the Egyptians' money and not a little bit of the Canaanites' money. Now, they're not producing anything up there either. So they're sending, I imagine, probably wagon load after wagon load down to take grain out, take it back up into Canaan. But what's happening? They're bringing in bags of money, gold, silver, precious stone, whatever it is, whatever was acceptable as a unit of currency. The Egyptians are taking that and putting it into big stores. So what's happening? Pharaoh's bank account is growing fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter, while the people are getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. They're starving. They're hungry. but they have enough food, they have enough money to buy. But what happens when you've spent your last dime on the last bag of grain? All right? And 47 verse 16. When the money was all spent, the Egyptians come to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? What, do you want to see your citizens die in front of you? Our money is gone. And Joseph says, okay, you don't have any money, give us your livestock. And I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone. So they bring in all of their livestock. So essentially what happens is all of the money in Egypt is in the treasury of Pharaoh. Now all of the livestock, all of these animals that were owned individually by the citizens now belong to Joseph, or belong to Pharaoh through Joseph. So now all the livestock is being pastured probably by his own family. You know, so he says, if you got anybody that knows what they're doing, give them to me and I'll put them in charge of my livestock. So now all of the Hebrews are taking care of all of Pharaoh's livestock that he got from his own people in exchange for food. So what happens when all of the food is gone and all of the livestock is gone? All right, chapter 47, verse 20. He says, so Joseph bought all of the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all of the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land becomes Pharaoh's. All right? So he says, we go back up to 19 real quickly. He says, because it kind of gives a two-pronged approach, right? Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food. And we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So what does he do? He essentially makes all of these people sharecroppers under his control, under Joseph's control in the name of Pharaoh. He said he didn't take all these people into custody. They weren't all gathered up and made forced to. But he says, your plot of land, this is what I'm going to do. You and your land now belong to Pharaoh. You are servants of Pharaoh. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to give you seed. You're going to go and you're going to grow the seed on your property. But when the harvest comes up, what am I going to take? I'm going to take 20%. So now Pharaoh, without having to lift a finger, is now getting 20% of all of the harvest coming from the Egyptian citizenry. Okay? I don't know how I feel about this. And part of me says, look, he's being shrewd. All right, he's being shrewd. You don't give the stuff away. You make sure that make sure they have some skin in the game. What happens when you give stuff away? You'll have people that will do nothing and they'll just simply ask for more. Okay, so part of it is thinking, okay, he's being pragmatic. Let's just call it pragmatic. But part of me says, you know, this seems a little. I wouldn't say unfair, but let's call it unfair. Okay, these people are desperate, and there's a way that you could look at that and say, well, maybe he's being unfair to these people rather than helping them. He's enlarging Pharaoh at his people's expense. There are two ways of looking at it. And I don't have particularly, if you look at it one way, that's entirely your decision, and I don't begrudge you that position on it at all. What do y'all think about that? Yes, ma'am.
Well, they're in the middle of a famine, but yet these people want seed.
Mm-hmm.
But how could it grow when there's a famine?
One thing that we look at. Let's look at it from our standpoint, because we had that in this country back in the 1920s. We always called the Dust Bowl. Does that mean that there was nothing being grown? No, there were people who they had gardens, they had their own plots, but those big fields where the big tractors would come through and they would plow stuff, it was dust, nothing but dust. So what we're talking about here is these people, their individual places with their individual properties. Are they able to possibly grow a little bit of a harvest? Yeah. It's a lot more work because you're not dealing with the Nile overflowing and all of this stuff growing. You're talking about a piece of property that may not be any bigger than this big room. Okay? You have a house, small house, and then you have this little bit of property. You had to work harder, right? You had to go get water. You had to water all the crops. You had to do all of this kind of stuff. So what he's doing here is he's letting individuals do it, but the big harvest, they're not coming in. Whatever's happening is still going on. And we don't really know, because there's not a lot of anthropological evidence about this famine. It's not mentioned in the history of Egypt other than there were plenty of little famines that would go on. There's not a lot said in regards to this particular famine. So we don't know what was going on. Was it sent by God, or was it simply something that was going to occur anyway, and God said, I'm going to use this to my advantage and my glory, which is entirely possible, maybe even probable. But this is the case of these are individual people rather than the big harvest that would be going on normally over the course of 7 years. So yeah, it's possible, it's probable concerning the context that this is what's going on. This is small individual groups, or small individual families, not big crops that are going on from the overflow of the Nile. Okay? So there was at least something that was coming up, and the people were allowed to keep 80% of it for themselves, but 20% of it went back to Pharaoh. So what's happening? As all of this vast amount of grain is going out of the warehouses, at least some of it is being brought back in. It can't keep up with the amount that's going out, but it doesn't need to, because the famine's not going to last forever. Famine eventually is going to break, and the Nile will overflow again. The harvest will come back. It may take a little while, but probably that first year, it was a welcome sight to see these little crops of green grow up where before it was just dust. There was nothing coming up. But here's what's happened. They've given, Joseph ends up, on Pharaoh's behalf, he takes all of their money, takes all their livestock, he takes all their land, and he even takes their own bodies in a figurative sense. Pharaoh basically owns the entire country, except for the property of the priests. These are pagan priests, right? Priests of the Egyptian gods. Pharaoh gave them an allowance of grain. So he didn't take their property, he didn't take them, and he didn't take the stuff. But everybody else, they essentially, Pharaoh owns you in much in the same way that back in the old days, the sharecroppers, yeah, you technically owned it, or you didn't own it, but technically you were on it and you had control over it, but at the end of the day, it's really, you were a tenant. You were a tenant in your own property. Okay? So, again, don't know how you feel about it, but this is what he does. This is what he does. But look what he says in verse 26, verse 26. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day. In other words, until Moses finishes writing this particular portion, that Pharaoh should have the fifth, 20%, and only the land of the priest did not belong to Pharaoh. All right? So, with that in mind, yeah, I said it's interesting that even God only required 10% of his servants. Pharaoh wanted 20%. That came from Joseph. Joseph decided that. I imagine Pharaoh was perfectly fine with 20%. Before people owned their own stuff, and now he's a landlord. He owns everything. So Israel settles in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. And they gained possessions in it, and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the late days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, the man Israel, not the nation. The nation's just getting started, but the man Israel is about to die. So he calls his son, Joseph. Why did he call Joseph, and why didn't he call Reuben? Reuben was his firstborn, but he calls Joseph. He puts Joseph in the place of Reuben. Reuben was his firstborn, but Reuben, because of his sin, he rejected him from that position. He no longer had the rights of the firstborn. Those rights went to Joseph. All right? So he calls his son Joseph. Plus, Joseph has more than a little bit of influence, a little bit more power. He says, if I found favor in your sight, I'm going to paraphrase that. In other words, essentially, if you love me, this is what you're going to do. Because that's really what it comes down to. If you love me, put your hand under my thigh. Where have we seen that before? The hand under the thigh oath. Who did that? Who did it and who required it? Anybody remember? I'll give you a minute. I'll even let you consult your notes. Anybody remember when the last time we saw this? It was one of the patriarchs. And it was one of his servants. And he makes him swear an oath. And the idea of put your hand under my thigh could be a euphemism. It could mean literally put your hand under my thigh. I don't know. We don't know.
Was it Abraham?
It was.
He had the servant Go
That's it.
find-
Abraham and possibly Eleazar, don't know, trusted servant. Abraham says, put your hand on my thigh and swear an oath that you will go to find a wife for my son. You will not go. You will not get one from Canaan, and you will not bring him back there. You will go find a wife and bring her here. So he sends Eleazar to Haran to Laban, and one of Laban's sisters says, this is the one. So this is where we find this the first time. So what's happening here is Jacob is asking Joseph to take this same oath. Not the same conditions, but the same type of oath. Put your hand under my thigh and swear to me this. He says, promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Well, in what way? Do not bury me in Egypt. As Abraham says, don't take my son back to Haran. Don't get him a wife from the Canaanites. Jacob is saying, do not bury me in Egypt. Why? Because that's not where his family's buried, right? They have a burial plot. It's called Machpelah. He said, this is what I want you to do. Let me lie with my fathers. Let me bury me with all of the people that mean the most to me. My father, my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother, everybody. I want to be buried with my family in the family burial plot. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. He answered and said, I will do as you have said. And he said to me, swear to me. And he swore to him that Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. The Septuagint of that says staff, and I could have looked it up, I guess. There's copies online. My copy of the Septuagint is packed with all my stuff out of my office, so I did not look it up, but I'll take their word for it. This word of Septuagint here is staffs. In other words, he was seated, whether it was on the side of his bed or whether it was in a chair. He had his staff and he bowed his head over his staff. Probably just an acknowledgement of the vow that Joseph is going to take. So he says this is what I want to do. Joseph said, I swear that I'm going to do that. And of course, we'll read a little bit later on, that's exactly what he does. They make a big mourning for him, and they take him out, and they bury him in Machpelah, and they all come back to Egypt, and they dwell there, until God takes them out again. All right. Joseph, we'll see here in just a little bit, Joseph actually makes the same request. It's a little bit more difficult for him because of who he was, and why would that be? Joseph says, I don't want to remain here. When you leave, you're going to take me with you. Why was it a little bit more difficult for Joseph, though? What did they do with Joseph? They'd already buried him. And they had embalmed him in the way of the Egyptians, and then they actually put him into a vault. So they actually had to break open that vault, get his bones, and carry them out with them when they left Egypt on their way up to take Israel, take Canaan, away from the Canaanites. So Joseph says the same thing. I don't want to be buried here. Take me with you when you leave. Yeah.
I mean, couldn't another reason? I mean, obviously Jacob loved Joseph, but I don't think any other of Jacob's sons had the ability to grant at that point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because of who he is.
Permission to leave.
Yeah, Joseph has power. He said Joseph has ability and power. He can make things happen, right? Who do you talk to? You talk to the guy that can make things happen.
So if he'd asked Reuben would have had to go to Joseph.
Yeah, Reuben. Well, yeah, probably. If you want it done in a right way, could Reuben have basically thrown his father over the back of a donkey and headed out of town? Yeah, but that's not really what you want to do with your father, is it? You want to show him some respect and the deference that's due a patriarch like Jacob is. And you read that they didn't go out. It wasn't like 4 or 5 guys, hey, we're going to carry Dad up there and put him in the ground. It was a big deal. They had this big procession. Basically, everybody other than Pharaoh, all of the head officials, they all went with Joseph and the brothers and all the kids, and they all went to Machpelah. There's probably a lot of mourning in Egypt. There was a period of mourning around the tomb. They put him in the tomb. There was probably a little bit more mourning, and then they all come back down. So it was a big deal, this big retinue of people, and it would have required a lot of work, a lot of service. Or maybe asking to borrow a couple of wagons like they did before, could be. But yeah, Joseph could make things happen where, Reuben. But we do know where Jacob had in mind. He already knew that Reuben was going to be displaced as the firstborn. The preference due to the firstborn. He already knew that well before he gives that blessing to the brothers, I believe in the next chapter. This is what we're going to get to next week, and we'll finish that up. All right, let's see. Let's go to 48 real quick. All right. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he takes with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." And it's kind of just detailing what's happening at this particular point in time. Israel, Jacob summons his strength and he sits up in bed. So it kind of gives an idea. He's laying in bed. He musters enough strength. You know, this man's getting old. He's had a long, as the scripture says, his days have been few but evil. So this is a man who's probably about ready to shuffle off. And he's kind of like almost maybe even looking forward to it. So Israel summons his strength, sits up in bed, and he says, "God Almighty, El Shaddai, appeared to me at Luz," and he details this vision. He said, "And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine." So essentially what he's doing here is he is adopting Joseph's two sons as his own. They are equal to, what does it say here? Equal to Reuben and Simeon. They're as equal to me as Reuben and Simeon. That's how I view them. And when the inheritance is passed on, they're going to have that share, so to speak. But the children that you fathered after them are yours. I'm not adopting any more kids. These are the two, however, that will be patriarchs of two of the tribes that are going to come out and take possession of the land. All right? They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while there was still some distance, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he says, "Who are these?" He knows who they are, but his eyesight's dim, so he's like, "Okay, who are these? Okay, this is Ephraim, this is Manasseh, these are my two sons. Bring them here so that I can bless them." His eyes were dim, he could not see. Joseph brings them close. Right, so as Jacob is sitting up on the side of his bed, he brings them. So he takes one by the hand, and he brings it to Jacob's left hand. He takes the other one by his right hand and brings him over to Jacob's right hand. And he says, Joseph took them both, and Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the hand of Ephraim, who was the younger, right, and his left on the hand of Manasseh. So he crosses his arms. So what it says, he blesses Joseph, and he gives him this blessing. And he says, "Bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on." In other words, they have occupy the same position as my other sons. Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim. It displeased him. He didn't want that. He said, "No, this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Jacob says, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great." Kind of like Jacob and Esau, remember? Don't worry. Esau is going to be made a people. You don't need to worry about him. Don't fear for him. Same thing with who? Isaac and Ishmael. Very good. Same thing with Isaac and Ishmael. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of him. It came from you. I'm going to take care of him. He says, don't worry about this. He shall become a people, and he also shall be great, but his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So Jacob put Ephraim before Manasseh. Right hand on Ephraim, left hand on Manasseh. He says, "I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers." This is a prophetic utterance. He's saying this is what's going to happen. You're going to go back up to the land of your fathers. "And I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope." And this is just kind of a specific prophecy for Joseph. There's a particular part of land that's going to be part of your son's possessions as patriarchs of their tribes. All right. God later refers to the kingdom of Israel by its pet name. He has a pet name for it. It's Ephraim. You'll see that through a lot of the prophecies. It talks about Ephraim. That's what it's talking about, is the northern kingdom. All right. That's chapter 48. Anybody got anything before we close out? Excellent. All right. Thanks, folks.